Hello and welcome to InSolidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast.
अभी तो बहुत बड़ा सपना है हमारा.
मुझे कामनी बहुत जरूरत है, मैंने ले जाओ.
अब हम लोग के पास कैपिटल आ गया, अब हम लोग खुल के करेंगे बिजनेस.
સમયમાં તો જોવા જઈએ તો આપણો બધો કામમાં જ સમય જાય છે. પોતાના માટે સમય કાઢવો બહુ મુશ્કેલ હોય છે.
अभी हम लोग मतलब ये पैसा राउंड होते होते हम लोग 12-13 लाख का बिजनेस चल रहा है.
You have tuned into InSolidarity.
Hi, I'm Saloni and welcome to episode 10 of InSolidarity. Today we are joined by Bhanupriya Rao, the founder and editor of Behanbox, an independent digital media startup for gender journalism. And Bhanupriya, having followed the work of Behanbox over the past few years, I do feel that a lot of our conversation today will be interesting, especially to young people who are turning to digital media, and not just for information, but also as a future career option potentially. But in today's episode, we are setting it against the backdrop of the national elections in India, and we will be speaking to Bhanupriya about the role of an inclusive media in facilitating women's participation in the political economy. Through your experience, Bhanupriya, on reporting gender issues, particularly women's political participation, the agrarian distress, migration, and climate change for leading digital publications, we want to look at how journalism plays and can play the role of a powerful tool for change to amplify women's voices and to not just break down structural barriers, but break them down through women's leadership. So very excited to have you on the episode today. But for our listeners, before founding Behanbox, Bhanupriya worked as a governance and public policy specialist for over a decade across the theme of journalism, but also in advocacy research and leading campaigns across Asia, Africa, and Europe. So welcome again to InSolidarity, Bhanupriya.
The first question, since you mentioned the elections, what becomes apparent is that we live in a time right now where the role of a fair, accessible media, of accessible communication is more apparent than perhaps ever. Whether it is for presenting, say, the ground realities of people's lived experiences, or whether it's speaking truth to power. So, in this time in India, what role do you think Behanbox plays? Why is there a need for a platform like a Behanbox, and therefore, what led you to build it?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, as far as the origin story of Behanbox goes, we saw as journalists and also as people who have been part of the whole development and policy scene in India, what we saw, the whole gap between practice and accessibility of knowledge, right, to the wider public. So there was talking in silos, like we all talked in a particular language for our own audiences, whereas the larger communities, the larger audiences were sort of were bereft of this kind of development and policy related sort of language or the happenings around. And the other big concern really was that the one kept hearing about the gender lens, but the gender lens meant, especially in journalism, meant including women's stories as footnotes, as also rants, and just sort of including their voices here and there. And what we saw was that as development practitioners and journalists also, what we saw was that that every issue, really the big critical issues of our times, affected different people differently. So, for example, climate change affects women differently, and within that, women of different intersections differently. More than difficult, I think it was very necessary to capture these if we were to make any progress, and if we were to make any kind of change, and why this change is necessary. And in that sense, communication and media becomes very, very important. So really for us, the idea was to was to what it shouldn't be, but it was to capture this niche. And I say that what affects half of a country, or indeed the globe's population, cannot be niche. It needs to be mainstream. And with that, we really came up with the idea. And if other mainstream media organizations were not doing it, then the only recourse we had was to take the issue into our own hands, help it shape in a way that spoke to both use journalism, the methodologies of journalism, with rigor, with reporting, with including voices, but also including the context, the policy perspective, and the other bigger context, the structures within which these issues occurred, make it accessible to the public, in terms of how they understood it, but also talk to policymakers and those who were were going to take these issues to advocacy, in their advocacy sort of campaigns, etc., to provide everything that is very evidence-based from a gender lens, and so in many ways to bring the disciplines of journalism, research, academia, and advocacy and campaigns, etc., together on a platform where there is everything for everybody, but with the larger aim of change. And for us, we believe that gender issues are very structural, and therefore gender inequality is not a happenstance. It is a very structural issue, right? And therefore the focus needs to keep going back on structures. And one of those structures is the political and policy structure. So for long as journalists, we have grappled with the idea that gender is a soft issue, right? And how do you make it hard hitting, right? And it is as if only corruption was hard hitting, or political reporting was hard hitting. So we wanted to make gender reporting a hard hitting issue, which would take policymakers and political actors to take it seriously, and therefore for them to be taken seriously, it needed to be part of the political agenda. And therefore there is what you see in our feminist election reporting newsroom program as well is this whole attempt to use elections as a way to make gendered voices, concerns, issues mainstream, so that these figure in the political agenda, and where women and other gender minorities and gender diverse persons are not just footnotes, are not just beneficiaries of schemes, but hear them speak about what their own agendas are, and put them on your political manifestos and in your policy making.
Thanks, Bhanupriya. I think you've touched on so many interesting things, and I'll pick them up one by one. But really speaking of demystifying this space and bridging the gap between silos is really interesting. Women not as footnotes, women not as beneficiaries or passive receivers. You've also touched on how different issues affect different women differently. So I'll pick up on that first, possibly. And so when we speak of women, and we know this, that women are not a homogeneous group, whether it's in terms of language, social norms, how caste affects them, how religion affects them, class affects them, how employment particularly also affects them, and their aspirations are different. So my question then is that there I'm assuming is a large diversity of women who are engaging with Behanbox. So who are these women, and what do these women get from a journalism like yours, which they don't get from other media?
Right. So in terms of, if you're asking who, in terms of audience, at the moment, the audience really, because we are an English language platform, the audience really is the English language comprehending audience, right? Having said that, they are, we feel even that audience is very important, because here we are filling a space that just did not exist, in terms of, so there is a lot of content happening, and that is important, but there wasn't journalism with that lens, with the gender lens, right? And for what we have in the past 4 years of our work have had our audience telling us is that a lot of things that they they probably understood more as a gut instinctual issue, or they saw around, or they didn't even understand, right? Our stories, which were backed so much by ground reports and evidence and the larger context with data and policies, and each of our stories is built to give you an entire sort of, as much as possible, no story, one story can cover everything, but gives you a very, very comprehensive picture of why things are how they are. We delve deep into the question of why, and therefore that becomes very important to our existing audience also, even though they're English speaking, maybe studying in universities, or just entering into academia, or even your normal general public, right? So therefore, we are filling that gap of understanding. We are filling that gap of telling you the why of things, of the inequality, and why, so why it exists, and what are the structures that perpetuate this inequality, whether it is the government or the non-government, and the society, the family, and the intersections of these. In terms of the people that we write about, so a lot of our writing is around women and gender diverse persons, and we often go to as much as the margins as we can to understand the marginality, right? And then bring that to the larger public discourse. So and it is often bothered us that the people that we write about also should become the recipients of what we are talking about, right? So which means that as a small organization, we have had to make certain interventions. We would want it to be a bigger thing at a bigger scale, where we are able to say the same thing in different languages through different other media, which is more accessible to a woman living in rural Uttar Pradesh, or somewhere in the Northeast, or in Kashmir, or wherever else, right? Someone who's outside of the English speaking audience. And we are constantly thinking of within the given resources and the teams that we have, and we are a very young organization. This is our 4th year. We're constantly thinking about how to reach that segment of our audience, who also gets to know, who has already articulated the problem to us, but also gets to hear how we have framed that problem, and how we can, what does that tell us about their lives, and also the fact that they are not alone, right? An ASHA worker in Uttar Pradesh is not alone, right? There are ASHA workers across India who are facing a similar predicament, but also there are people around India who feel that the policies are unjust, right? So it is about knowing, but it's also for that sort of category of audience that we write about. It is also making them feel that they're not alone, that there are people like us, you, who empathize, and who are also going to be allies in their fight or in their struggle. So in sort of to cut a long story short, that is how we look at the people that we write about, and that means that the frame we use is one of definitely social justice, but also a question of rights, right? So everything comes from the framework of rights, but also increasingly what we are looking at is the different sort of issues that around aspirations, and we're capturing the moments, right? Because often there's a very static way of looking at things, and our societies are emerging rapidly. So what is the place of a woman in rural Haryana? What is she aspiring for, really? And it doesn't serve if we are saying, oh, all she wants is like a husband with a government job. what a woman in rural Haryana wants is a government job. So and therefore, to capture these moments in history is very, very important, because our societies are rapidly changing, and we need to capture that change in an effective and as close to the truth as possible.
And that's such a good way of putting it, I think. And again, so you're obviously thinking of women from different backgrounds at Behanbox, and you are thinking of change through women, not just change for women, from what I can sense. You're also thinking of building solidarities between women. So, if in this context, I can ask you a more general question, a sort of slightly broader question, is that, and which is that the media information is one thing, but what it can lead to, and you've talked about this, is wider political participation, especially in the context of informal women workers, where labor force participation is low and marked by high level of insecurity, which plays a huge role in determining political participation by women. So, in this context, how does an inclusive journalism, how does an inclusive media and access to knowledge create a higher engagement by women in this political economy? What is this pathway of, gaining agency and wider active participation by women?
Right, that's such an important question, because even as media, we don't think about often the women we write about, or the people we write about. Right? It is they just become the subjects of our stories, and I have always argued, and this is where I think my background also in the practice of the development sector, and then later on to journalism, somehow combines this concern that as journalists, they're not just they're not characters of our stories. Yes, it's very important for us to be as truthful to the issue as possible, as bring out the issues with as much empathy, but also as much rigor, as much like forcefulness as possible. But also we need to think about how do we use these stories, how do these stories become like useful for them, right? The people that we're writing about. Often we write and we forget and we move on, right? Which is where the approach we take at Behanbox is that often what in journalism is used to be called staying with the story, right? And that means that when we take up an issue of informal workers, so informal work is a big area of our reportage, and it somehow started it started because we were very concerned about it. We feel deeply about it, but also because if we were to look at women and work, we cannot not look at a majority of women who are involved in the informal sector, right? But then that where it stops. So you report, you write about them, you with as much comprehensive knowledge information as possible, looking at the various aspects of it. So there is the state aspect, there's a structural aspect, there's a policy aspect, there's the work aspect, there's also the leisure aspect, right? Because women embody all of these things. But then the question then is, how do we use this information so that in ways that is beneficial for them? One way is to report and take it to all of the places, like say, for example, all the campaign groups and where or people working in the informal sector, where they know one aspect of things, but they probably do not know the other aspect of things. So it is important for journalism organizations like ours to build those partnerships, to build those advocacy. So while we as journalists should not get into the advocacy for obvious reasons, but I feel we need to have that pathway where we are making these insights useful for organizations who will take it up. Then another thing, very interestingly, and I was having a conversation recently with someone. So ASHA workers is a big area of our work. We've been covering ASHA workers forever now, since we came into being, and we felt that one of the pieces of reporting that we are doing, or we will be doing now, around digitization and so on. How do we take that information and make it useful for not just for our audiences who reads on our platforms, but to the union of ASHA workers? Because at the end of the day, they're going to be taking that to for their own sort of campaign, for their own advocacy and so on. So when we think about a particular story or a particular issue, we've got to be thinking, and this is where we depart from organizations that are just media organizations, so saying, oh, here, read a good report on this. We're also constantly thinking, how is this going to make use, how is this going to be useful for other for different other constituencies. There's a union of informal labor workers, those working on safety, security, posh, that sort of thing. Those working on the area of leisure, for example, working on entrepreneurship, working on safe roads and safe mobility, and so on. So I feel it needs to be a look. It's not just important to just create that story, but to also build these solidarities in a way that that we are able to sort of help in the effective participation, because it's like we don't have to do it. And that sort of struggle is coming from them, the informal workers themselves. I mean, they're organizing every day. They are fighting for their rights. What we do, and this is something an ASHA worker once told one of our reporters, that we keep doing these protests. No one cares, and it gives us a lot of heart that every time we do, you guys are there. So for me, for as a founder, but also for the rest of the team, that's why we do these things. That's why sometimes we think, oh, another protest, should we cover it? But every time there is, I feel that even though we are saying the same things, it's important, because that's why we exist. So yeah, we're a really small part in the larger struggle of every woman out there.
I mean, but the fact is that you're attacking these structural issues, like you said in the beginning, and gender, like you said, is a structural problem. And you're again, like you said, you're making it part of the political agenda. So if I can ask you to look at the same thing in a different way, I mean, there is a role that the larger political machinery plays, of course. It determines a lot of what you and I are talking about, within this realm of women's work, women's political participation, and so on and so forth. So what is then that we can ask of this public space, and what are the changes that we need in the wider system when it comes to creating a space which is safe for women's voices to be expressed in the ways that they want to be expressed, they need to be expressed, and also particularly for the development of women as leaders. What is the wider context that we need? What is the wider push that needs to happen?
I always believe, and I've seen it, is not just a belief arising out of nowhere. I've seen women are leaders themselves, right? You look at any kind of campaign, or some people just don't even know, right? And but they are happening. That kind of organizing at the grassroots has been happening for years now, and it's intensifying that struggle for rights. So as a media organization, as a journalism platform, the one thing we always believe in is to look at that leadership in the context that it is set in, right? So, for example, trade unions. Women are leading trade unions, and so we started a series looking at women as trade union leaders, and which we are going to resume once the elections are over. But the fact that these are not ordinary trade unions of affiliated to these are not trade unions affiliated to political parties. These are very grassroots trade unions, unions of waste pickers, unions of textile workers, and there is amazing leadership there, right? If you look at women and grassroots governance as well, your panchayat leaders, there's often this static notion which keeps on perpetuating all the time, that women leaders, women in grassroots, in panchayats especially, are proxies. They're sarpanch, they're led by their sarpanch patis. Okay. And I always argue, we can keep arguing that, you've got to look at it differently, or you have to show that why you have to look at it differently, that any form of sort of public claiming of space by women as leaders is a continuous process, right? If we've got a Panchayati Raj amendment which allows them a reservation in panchayats in 1992, and it's about 30 odd years, then there is a particular timeline to that development also, right? And also, you've got to look at claiming of space or leadership in a continuum. It is not like you get a platform and then one fine day everyone is a leader, right? You have to see how women are negotiating that space, and that's very important for our understanding of leadership and feminist leadership, especially in the informal or any other sector, which is not the formal sector, even there. Right. So one of the things we constantly keep talking about is how women are negotiating these spaces. So the fact that the one time a woman has challenged that she be allowed to sit on the chair as a panchayat leader, as a Dalit woman challenging that is leadership, and so we what we are trying to do is change people's understanding of what leadership looks like. It is not just about just going out there and claiming an office, but there is a certain it operates in a continuum. So there is that. So in terms of women's leadership, I think we need to look at it. A reporting and writing about leadership really needs to be multifaceted and looking at all the different angles. Once what happens when people start noticing that women are leaders too, that there is it completely subverts this notion that women cannot be capable leaders. And therefore, this argument that what will happen even if you give them any kind of affirmative action reservation. But look at the panchayats. We've given them 30 odd years, and look, there are still sarpanch patis. Right now, this becomes a very defeatist argument to say, oh, we don't need to give them any more reservation anywhere. So the reason why we write a lot about women's leadership and expand the notion of women's leadership is to say that the barriers are very structural, right? And therefore, if you want leadership to emerge, which already there is, then we need these structures to be eased out. For example, campaign finance, especially in political leadership. Campaign finance is a big structural barrier, right? Which is what doesn't allow women to participate in electoral politics or any form of political scenarios. Now, when you write about something like that, what we need to impress upon, say, the election commission or even political parties, is that you have to put a cap on election spending, right? Because that is how you are going to enable women to come into to claim their space. What we need to be telling political parties through this sort of knowledge and insights is that you need to make special campaign pots of campaign finance available for women, because they are not able to access the networks of raising finances like men do, right? And especially women coming from different marginalized communities, etc. So this is the way I see towards, I mean, our role in sort of creating the easing these structural barriers is to shine a spotlight on the barriers themselves. And then for organizations then to take these things up as advocacy issues, because I believe a lot of them also do not understand or understand in very siloed manner what are these structural sort of issues. So therefore, every time the government comes up with any form of affirmative action, whether it is free bus rides or 33% seats for women in the parliament or legislature, there is one coterie you will hear who is always saying, but why, right? And that's because I feel there is no fundamental understanding of the barriers. And once that understanding is there, I feel people are amenable to changing their minds, if not everyone, but that also means that others who are making these allowances in structures will also be able to pay attention to the little nuances.
So, I mean, that's so important, right? Because what I'm hearing is that women are claiming spaces. You're seeing women claim spaces, but for that to happen, people have to give up some space or have to make some space. And you're really facilitating that process by shining a spotlight on it, like you said, by pushing for this to happen, by becoming a voice, really. And the other thing you said was, we think of leadership in a very specific way, a very masculine way, if I may. And to change that perception, to change that mindset is a process. It is a continuous process which requires patience, it requires perseverance. Of course, it requires access to resources, but it is a process. And so there is potentially a long-term future for a platform like a Behanbox. How would you then like to see this platform, see the space of gender journalism evolve?
For me, the whole idea of gender journalism shouldn't be restricted to one odd platform or even 10 platforms, right? That look at gender specifically. Great, they exist. What would be great is if every media space that and if I'm particularly talking about media because we are in that space, right? Every sort of my vision or my idea is that it should become as mainstream in all of the media that exists today or will exist in the future, right? So we talk of gender journalism as a particular discipline or so on. I think it needs to be integrated into everything that everyone does. It's a lens that you need to sort of put on when you're and therefore what I envisage for the media landscape really is for, say, the legacy media to start looking at gender not just as inserting two or three women into their stories, because they are ticking the boxes and saying, hey, we also talked about the women's vote, right? What would be great is if you in your sustained reportage looked at all of these structural barriers that we're talking about, right? Whether it's so everything is a feminist issue. If tax is a feminist issue, budget is a feminist issue, so public provisioning is a feminist issue. So all of these things, when you talk about in your reportage, needs to have that specific gendered and feminist lens, and there is a difference, right? While there is a convergence also, and feminism is about equality, gender is using the lens to further the feminist goal, really. So it makes as far as small or even big niche media organizations, niche I use within quotes, like ours, uh, are the only ones doing the job. We are only doing just just part of the job, right? So that is one. In terms of for future of platforms like Behanbox, I think we need to also think beyond just as they say these days, creating content. Just whether as journalists, we know just creating the resources and the journalism is not enough. We've got to actively start thinking, because this is something with a mission, right? The mission is change. The mission is sort of erasing these structural inequalities, and what role do we have to play in that? And therefore, for us to just create stuff in a vacuum, and for us to think that, oh, somehow it will travel in the ether and reach the places it is supposed to, is will be a little will be a far-fetched thing. What I envision is for organizations like us to be part of broader coalitions that are in the business of change, right? And what parts that each of us need to play, and for us not to like exist in a vacuum, and for media to exist completely independently. The independence is very important, but we can strategize and think about and expand our own roles as well to sort of to affect larger coalitions while keeping the independence of us as a media organization alive.
Thank you, Bhanupriya. I have one last question for you, which is a lot of our listeners tend to be young people, young women in particular, who maybe want to enter the space of the media, but not just mainstream media or niche, like you said, niche media like Behanbox. What is the one piece of advice, or what is the one first step you think they could take if they want to start thinking about this as a future pathway for themselves?
That's both an interesting and difficult question. I think the important thing, especially I would say, coming like thinking from the point of view of Behanbox, I think the important thing is to feel for something. If you do not feel for about an issue strongly enough, you will never be able to do justice to it. So I see I see this. So journalism, as with advocacy or other forms of change making, is driven by passion. So and it is about the passion to tell that story. So you have to be out there. So if you I feel that for those wanting to enter into a space like this, it needs you need to have that drive to be that, hey, I really want to tell this story because no one else is, right? And then it becomes my moral responsibility to tell this story in as truthful a manner as possible. So without that passion, it then just becomes another job, and then it also becomes boring. um, so that and the rest of the things like skills, etc., are things that one can learn as part of the job. We do a lot of that at Behanbox. We kind of take a lot of freshers in new people who are interested and so on. And frankly, looking at how to look at data, how to look at policies, how to make sense of it, those are things one develops. But hey, I really want to be out there and report why women do not have the jobs that they aspire for, is something that is very, very innate. So that sort of passion for storytelling is absolutely essential, considering that journalism as we know it is not very financially rewarding in many ways. So it is the passion that then becomes very, very crucial. The second thing is to be very interested in making those connections. Often, with looking at structural issues, whether it's the state or the society, there is fun in even if fun sounds a very sort of an interesting way of putting things, but when it's like solving a problem, right? If when you're trying to make these connections, that why do women have aspirations but not jobs? How is that linked to contractualization of that governments are pushing for? And you see that there is a link between how what the governments are doing in terms of how they're thinking about jobs is pushing women back into patriarchy, right? So and making those connections are very, very it's not just a skill, it's also a mindset that, hey, I want to explore an issue from all different angles and see what are the different ways in which the puzzle fits together. Or the fact that every issue is open to a lot of nuance, right? There is no straightforward answer to everything. We should be open to that uncertainty, to the possibility of asking endless questions, that, okay, this makes sense, but then this doesn't make sense. So how do I then explain it to my audience, right? How do I explain it to myself? And then the most important thing that I keep telling everyone, including myself, is just listen, 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 right? Don't go into like this is a mantra I follow for myself. I read a lot, but then when I go into the field, all my reading is just kept aside. I don't want to go with a preset framework, because what I encounter on the field, it will be completely different and will throw up a completely different scenario. I should be open to listening to what these people are saying. And often that these are very contradictory things. People will be saying a lot of contradictory things. So to take as much, listen as much, but also corroborate with different other sort of happenings around and so on. So it's a very, very interesting thing, especially with gender, because it's now that, so women are both very outspoken, but also they are not, depending on what context you put them in, right? So therefore, finding this sort of these words in these, or thoughts in these moments of silences, when women are not speaking, yet they're saying a lot, right? When they're saying so much, they're of course saying things. So it's very interesting. And therefore, for someone young who wants to understand how how these nuances work as parts of the larger structure, uh, if you have that whatever for it, that zeal for it, then you are in the right business. You really should be a journalist.
So nice to hear you speak of this since with such passion yourself, Bhanupriya. I think it kind of reflects in the work that you're doing, your enthusiasm for the work. But thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, do share it with your friends and family. If you would like to collaborate or partner with us or get in touch with our women's cooperatives, write to us at communications@sevafederation.org. We will be back with another guest in the next episode. Until then, stay tuned to InSolidarity.